Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. You know, every week I say, oh, my God, yet another great show, but oh, my God, yet another great show. Today we're going to be talking to David Sereda. The listed topic was what in the world is going on, but our focus is really going to be talking about the Fukushima nuclear reactors that had the meltdown in Japan, and really talk about the impact of radiation on ourselves, on our environment, and just really kind of talk about that whole topic because it's important, and we're all being affected by it. At least that's what I believe. So before I bring David on, a couple of announcements. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com. That's my website, and you can learn about all the products and services that I offer that is available to you. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can learn to become a energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or a medical intuitive from the comfort of your own home. And please do stop by the Just Energy Radio webpage, that's www.justenergyradio.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter. And it'll keep you informed of our wonderful programming that we have coming up. We also have over 4 years' worth of archives that are available for you to download and listen to on your iPhone or smartphone, or you can just sit in front of your computer and listen to them live online. Well, not live, but almost live online. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about David and get him on the air because I think this is just, another one of those topics that really needs to have a voice and a platform for the information to get out because I don't think we've been told the whole story or the whole impact of what really is going on. David Sereda is co-founder of Voice Entertainment, director, producer, filmmaker, photographer, author, and public speaker. He is also a well-known space scientist, physicist, ecologist, and spiritual explorer. He has planted over 1.3 million trees in Canada, spoke in Congress for clean fusion power in 1993, marketed sustainable housing, breakthroughs in oil spill cleanup, solar, wind, and hydrogen technology. His goal is to inspire and teach other people about how they can have their own mystical religious experiences and how they can use meditation and prayer to heal any mental challenges or personal struggles they might be experiencing. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio from voiceentertainment.net, David Sereda. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm 9 months, almost 10 months a father now, so I'm just having a blast with my little baby girl. I'm almost 50 years old. I'll be 50 on the 21st of this month, so I really started late. But one of the things with starting late is you get so much life experience, and the immensity of love that I experience and I have for my daughter it's just unbelievable. It's just this little being coming into the world, and it makes you. There were times when I was younger where I thought, I can take all the risks in the world, and this world is so crazy. I don't care if I ever die even. I just want to get out of this place. But, that kind of an attitude. I was an extreme skier, skydiver, meditator, yogi, and it's not that I was reckless. I was very careful when I skydived over 200 times, did high-altitude jumps. But when you have a little baby like this and you realize, oh, my God, this is in these mystical states of meditation that I go into when I practice meditation every day, I just make this commitment to her that I never want to leave her. I never want to, even when I die, I want to, appear to her and always be her father. And it also, when it comes to what's happening on the planet, the giant oil spills last year and all the toxic rains that ensued in the Midwest to the eastern states that are still going on, and there's still reports there. And now, in fact, when the night that Fukushima happened, on March 11th, my computers were off. It was wee early hours of the morning. I saw this bright golden light, and I heard a woman right behind my head. And I had seen my daughter, many times out of body. I actually seen her with my eyes open, and she has this bright golden orb, halo around her. And this time, I didn't know if it was her or not. And I hear this woman's voice say, "Look." And it pointed to the northeast from where we are in Sedona, which would be Japan. And I didn't turn the computer on, and I went back to bed, and it just kept waking me up. And I finally turned the computer on, and my wife and I both had many dreams of tsunamis and massive earthquakes, as well as many people have had the premonitions of these things happening. So I wasn't entirely surprised at what had happened. But then what happens is, as soon as I'm alerted that the Fukushima plant is in danger, and I knew that they quickly shut down the nuclear power plant, I said, there's going to be an explosion, and you got to get out of there. I sent emails to my friends in Japan, and they responded back that there was an MIT physicist who had posted a blog, all the reasons why he didn't believe they would have a meltdown. And I read his blog later, and I just couldn't believe the arrogance of this man. He has no experience in knowing the kind of background I have in working with the original Manhattan Project scientists who built the atomic bomb, and everything I learned from those scientists. And people like Glenn Seaborg, Murray Gell-Mann, Bogdan Maglich, Dr. John Goffman, and you just wonder, what are you trying to protect industry, or are you trying to protect lives? Because you could see it explode. And I sent letters to scientists at Boeing and Lockheed and said, you need to get a salt plasma solution in a helicopter and drop it on top of the power plant the second it explodes to knock the radioactive cloud to the ground, because you don't want that cloud to get in airborne. And sure enough, everybody, all my friends ignored me about Japan. They said everything's fine. And I said, no, it isn't. I was really, really, furious. Because what happens before you come to the moment of the explosion is that when nuclear power plants get old, the older they get, the neutron radiation, which is neutral particle radiation, makes the thick container, the several inches thick of steel container around the reactor brittle. It becomes crumbly. And it starts to get hairline cracks. In fact, Japan had already reported in several of their power plants that they had some fairly serious radiation leaks, and that's due to this cracking. And that's where the physicist at MIT was very ignorant. He was thinking of a brand new power plant has this 7 inches of steel container. Well, sorry, that doesn't mean anything when a power plant's even 15 years old. The cracks start to appear and the radiation leaks happen. And when they're brittle, of course, they're more vulnerable during an explosion. And Japan, like everybody, and I've worked in this area, with Yucca Mountain nuclear waste dump sites and others, nobody knows where to store all their spent fuel rods, which is high-level nuclear waste. Plutonium and uranium fuel rods get stored on-site on nuclear power plants in cooling ponds, and then they start storing them in the roofs of the power plants because they don't know where to put it, and it's illegal to do that, but yet the news didn't really do a good job of reporting just how much spent fuel was being stored in the roof at Fukushima, in the different numbers of power plants there. So when the explosion happened, I wasn't surprised, because you can't suddenly shut down a nuclear reactor in an emergency. You have to slowly shut it down, and it has to be done over a long period of time, preferably days to a week. So the sudden shutdown means you lose control of the core, and it's not like a barbecue. It's not, you don't just pour salt water on it. In fact, pouring salt water on it also can aggravate it, because of the minerals in the salt become ionized. You produce tons of iodine, you produce hydrogen, you produce all sorts of fission fragments and different radionuclide particles. And then the explosion happened. Nobody at Boeing or Lockheed had taken my advice. The cloud obviously was highly radioactive, and with the prevailing winds was making its way to Alaska and China and Russia and North America. And this is where, first I'm going to tell you the real facts about low level of radiation exposure that we can experience here in North America and have experienced from Fukushima, from the experts. And then I'm going to show you
one really quick question before we move into that. How bad was it? In the reality, there's what we heard on the news. It's like, oh, well, they're shutting it down. There maybe could have been a little radiation leak, but you never really heard how bad it really was.
Well, finally, the New York Times, even 3 weeks ago, reported that they had hit the highest levels of radiation yet. It's the most nuclear experts believe it is beyond Chernobyl, because Chernobyl was one core running at 50% power. And, Chernobyl was in a 1.1 gigawatt or 1.1 billion watt core running at half power. And these are 700 megawatt and even over 1 gigawatt power cores. There's different reactors in Japan. I believe there's 7 of them, and at least 3 of them have blown up, and severe leakage in some of the others. And the radioactive ponds that house the high level spent fuel rods were completely exposed to the environment and the oncoming tsunami and the waves. And then now radiation levels are so high there today that a worker can't work for one day without dying within several months. And all the workers have cancer. The mainstream media has done a good job of keeping that out of the media. But if you read enenews.com, and you're going to see the truth of what's going on over there daily. And it's all the workers have cancer. And the effects for Japan are, for someone who's experienced and knows what is going to happen, are so disastrous in the next 10 years. Now, a friend of mine, Katrine, was a survivor of Chernobyl. In fact, she saw it from the train when she was a little girl in Ukraine. And, my family, Sereda is a Ukrainian name, so half of me that's bloodline. And when that happened, when Chernobyl happened, I remember it so well. I was a tree planter back then in Canada, and I would never ever forget the day that it happened. And the media reported it as a minor incident, just like Japan. Oh, don't worry, we have it under control. And what started to happen after Japan is that everyone said, oh, don't worry, we can handle a little bit of radiation. We know what safe levels are, and the Japanese government was lying to all the families in the area. Even in Tokyo, everyone was being lied to, hundreds of miles away of the potential threat. And friends of mine were there, oh, don't worry, everybody's fine. And I'm like, I can't believe this guy is telling his friends they're fine and they don't need to leave, because what happened in Chernobyl is it takes a year for the cancers to start showing up. Within 3 years, tens of thousands of people are dying. And then finally Russia admitted 1 million deaths due to Chernobyl, which took about 10 years to happen. And when you understand that, and you understand that this is 3 cores that are fully exposed now, you have true meltdown in 3 cores, and even the New York Times had reported that. Levels of radiation are so severe, they've gotten into all the water tables in Japan. Levels in Tokyo are so high that recently somebody went there as a tourist and decided to have their body tested for radionuclides, which are different radioactive isotope particles, and they were loaded with over 6,000 becquerels per of radioactive cesium in their body. Now, that's unimaginable what that means. So everyone thinks, oh, but we're not dying. We don't all have cancer yet, so we must be doing something right. Or maybe they're thinking, very inexperienced, that we're going to survive this because I'm fine today, way less than a year later. And this is where it starts to get really scary, is the ignorance is so vast. It's so vast, and all of these, over 8 million people living in Tokyo, many of them have no idea what's happening inside of their bodies right now. They just don't know. And there are extremely positive things you can do to reduce or even survive these radionuclides in your body, and I'm going to tell people about that later on, and studies that and technology that I've developed myself that theoretically could do amazing things for people. So first, I'm going to go into really hardcore facts here from the experts. I mean, these are the people that I worked for in nuclear fusion, and then I'm going to show you what you can do about it, if anything, depending on where you live. So as the clouds started moving, there was a Norwegian institute tracking the radiation clouds on a daily basis for a few months after Fukushima. We could see huge amounts of iodine and cesium making their way into Alaska and British Columbia, and all the way, many of the plumes going straight into Oregon and Northern California, and some much lighter amounts hitting, Southern California, and even coming into Arizona where I live. And I have radiation detectors here, and we hit a few very low trace level spikes here. But what I was seeing was coming into Vancouver, British Columbia, and Seattle and Idaho and places like that. Finally, the Environmental Protection Agency started posting data on their website that definitely there were a lot of radioactive particles even in the San Francisco Bay Area, even as far away as Pennsylvania, New York, the East Coast, Virginia. The state government website was warning people not to drink rainwater collected from the cisterns and methods of capturing rainwater because it was too radioactive. I mean, all the way in Virginia. So, and then all of a sudden, all over the New York Times and Fox News, you have this woman on saying, don't worry, a little bit of radiation isn't bad for you. It's not worse than flying on an airline at 30,000 feet, or not much worse than cell phone radiation. Now, to be really clear to your listeners, that cell phone radiation is microwave radiation, but your body is exposed to that radiation, but it's not ingesting particles that are radiating 24 hours a day. Now, when you're talking about flying at 30,000 feet, you're being exposed to cosmic radiation. Very distant, very extremely weak amounts of cosmic radiation can pass through your body, but they're not leaving particles, actual particles that are radioactive. Now, with Fukushima and Chernobyl, these little particles of dust, everything from radioactive iodine to cesium to americium to tritium, which no one in the media has talked about, is a particle of radioactive hydrogen, and it bonds to any form of water, human blood, and it is a mutagen. Will mutate your DNA if it gets in your body. And studies done by nuclear physicists that I know think it's one of the most horrible forms of radiation because it bonds with the hydrogen in your blood and damages your DNA. So therefore your offspring, or if you're a child and you're ingesting tritium, it could be very serious. It could cause severe problems as the child is developing. Because children's DNA is telling their proteins, their RNA, to build proteins very rapidly. If the information from the DNA is mangled, then the whole factory is going to be completely off balance, depending on how many. Now, Arnie Gunnarsson, a nuclear scientist at Fairwinds, was saying that in Seattle, residents of Seattle during the months of March and April and May were ingesting 5 hot radioactive nuclear particles a day. And when he says hot, it means they're still fissioning. They're still in the slow fission process from the power plant. So they are hot. They're tiny. I mean, you can't even see them on the head of a pin. And among the worst of all the particles, beyond the tritium, is the plutonium. Plutonium-238, a millionth of a gram, is the tiniest dust particle. According to nuclear experts I work for, they said that will kill you. Over time, you get one of those in your lungs and you're dead. Now, San Francisco, according to EPA, and had very high increased levels against normal background, supposedly normal background random deposition of plutonium-234 and 238. And when Fukushima happened, those levels went up over 100 times in the Bay Area. Hawaii, the levels were so bad in the plutonium family, I can't even tell you how much I would never live or eat food from Hawaii at this point in time. So that's what's happening out there. You've got the plutoniums, which are utterly deadly. You've got tritium, which, it can travel in the rain, and so does the radioactive iodine. Now, all of these particles have what are called half-lives, which is the time it takes for half of their radiation to decay. And the iodines have half-lives of, 8 or 9 days. But strangely, there was so much radioactive iodine reported in British Columbia and Seattle and these kind of areas, I wondered, how did it survive a 30-day trip? How did it get here? And the only answer I came up with is that the radioactive plutoniums in the air were still hot and they were giving birth to radioactive iodine in the moisture droplets in the air, because in the air you have natural amounts of iodine particles, from the sea and all the ocean currents and all of the clouds traveling across the ocean. So those locally traveling plutoniums have half-lives in the thousands to millions to billions of years, depending which plutonium you're talking about. There's a lot of them. And so they'll be radioactive forever. And the cesiums will be radioactive for hundreds of years in your body. So if a person in Seattle was ingesting 5 hot particles a day, well, in 30 days, that's 150 particles. So that's a lot. That's a real lot. And so the damage is not evident yet. Everybody's calmed down. Nobody's following what's happening in Fukushima today, which is full meltdown status, full core exposure. And everyone's thinking, oh, well, we're fine. Well, that's not true, because there were reports reported in American media that the child-infant death rate in Washington and Oregon and some eastern United States suddenly multiplied dozens of times. Now, even though this death rate per month is in the 30s or 40s, in a state, for that to go up is an early indicator, and that this radiation is affecting us. And, I think, I'm a father. If my daughter died from exposure to radiation, I would be livid in the media. I would just be, just insane for the rest of my life fighting the ignorance in this industry. The group that I worked for at Advanced Physics Corporation in the late 80s, throughout the 90s, were the legendary builders of the atomic bomb, working and supporting my boss, Bogdan Castle-Maglich, who had invented a new type of fusion reactor that fused helium-3 and hydrogen fuels and produced non-radioactive nuclear power. And $27 million were spent on 4 prototypes, all of which were making massive progress towards the ultimate goal of a working fusion power plant. I spoke with the group in Congress in 1993 in April under the Gore administration and Clinton, and we were turned down by Gore for funding. There was no interest in the Gore administration to fund non-radioactive nuclear energy. And all the investors I brought to the company were turned away by the Department of Energy, told them to stay away from our company and do not invest in us. Meanwhile, James Fletcher, the head of NASA, and Earl Van Landingham, the head of all technology and space access for NASA, wanted us to get our money. And in fact, they had helped us in the past in trying to get money from the government and were denied because they needed helium-3 would have made the ultimate miniature space-based power plant. A meter squared could produce 1 billion watts of power, far more power than the solar panels on the space station produce today. In fact, Earl Van Landingham told me on the phone that helium-3 can produce anti-proton propulsion drives that could send spacecraft up to 1/10 the speed of light, which is 67 million miles an hour. So we don't have propulsion systems like that, according to NASA today. So all of the benefits that we would have gained from helium-3 fusion were lost. There was no support in the American media at CNN or anywhere else that I had appeared on news channels that would do any story on it. And we were just cut off everywhere. So the scientist died. Glenn Seaborg died. Seaborg was chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. This is where things get really interesting. And John Goffman, who I worked with outside the group, was one of the original Manhattan Project scientists like Seaborg, who worked on the atomic bomb, but after Seaborg at the Atomic Energy Commission under Kennedy and Johnson hired him to do the most thorough and complete study on the health effects of low-level nuclear radiation. No study, not to this date, in any country was more thorough than Dr. John Goffman's study. Now, it's alarming what he discovered. Now,
actually, David,
yeah.
We need to take a break here in a second, but
okay.
Why don't we take a little bit early break, and then we can come back and you can talk about the results of the study as opposed to me interrupting you while you start. Sound good?
Okay. How long is the break?
It's about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So the music's going to come up. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to David Sereda about radiation and the Fukushima nuclear reactor meltdown. And we'll be back with David after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. It's Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here talking with David Sereda about nuclear radiation and the incident in Fukushima with the nuclear reactor meltdown. And David, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Before the break, you started talking about the results of the testing that they did regarding low-level radiation, and why don't you share what they found?
Well, the studies were done by Professor John Goffman, who's a medical doctor, MD and PhD in physics, who worked on the Manhattan Project, building the atomic bomb. And he's hired by the Atomic Energy Commission, which is headed by Dr. Glenn Seaborg, who won the Nobel Prize with Macmillan for the discovery of the explosive uranium isotopes, and even had particles named after him. And I worked with both of these men in person, so I know what I'm telling you is not just something I Googled. But you can follow me if you want to see the Goffman studies. They're at ratical.org, ratical.org. and or just Google John Goffman Dr. John Goffman, and you'll see lots of stuff on him. So what Goffman did is he tested, human cells and, with low levels of different types of radionuclides, and that means everything from americium, cesium, to iodine, to plutoniums, to, there are so many, there are literally dozens and dozens of some of these radioactive particles that are emitted during a nuclear accident or a nuclear bomb. And what had happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on them, is quite interesting. That is an amazing study in itself, and it gave us a kind of a prelude to the fact that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people could die of cancers ensuing a nuclear blast. The difference between a nuclear explosion like those in Japan at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 is the radiation in the fall is a one-time cloud. It's a one-time event. But the slow fission of uranium in a nuclear power plant, and there are many different types of nuclear power plant containing systems, is in a way much worse than a single or 2 very small atomic bombs. I mean, the atomic bombs dropped there were in the order of 22 kilotons of TNT equivalency. Now we have megaton and 100 megaton or million-ton equivalent bombs today. So even though those 2 bombs produce hundreds of thousands of deaths in cancer in Japan, and not to mention birth defects in the ensuing children, and the blood wine of many families in Japan, the breast cancers really accelerated. So did prostate cancers, and so when Goffman was doing his study, he's not doing his study on the fallout of a nuclear bomb. He's doing the study on low-level nuclear waste, including from hospitals, from mammograms, from X-rays, from living near a nuclear power plant, from living near a hospital where nuclear waste can be improperly handled. And he's doing studies also on a nuclear incident like Chernobyl. So the cells that he exposed the different particles to, he had to come up with a number for the United States Congress and the Department of Energy and the Atomic Energy Commission. And in 1969, he gives his report to Glenn Seaborg, and they're saying, "What do you mean? This is extremely low level." He's saying John Goffman is saying if the United States ever reaches 67 millirads per year exposure per person, that the lethal cases of cancer could reach over 40,000 in a nation of 200 million people back then. So that doesn't sound too bad, right? Today we think, oh, well, there's only 30,000 people who are going to die from cancer and hundreds of thousands of lethal. Well, what ended up happening is when the data was submitted to Congress, the head of the committee on nuclear energy and radiation and safety said, well, we have to increase your levels by 100, which would mean if we ever reach 100 times your levels, we're going to see cancer deaths in the order of 300,000 per year. Per year. So we think, well, we can handle 300,000 deaths per year in the United States from cancer. So that's what the government wanted to do. And Goffman was livid. He was outraged. He's just, as a scientist who was reporting the truth in actual facts, just couldn't believe that he was not being acknowledged. So they went ahead and they actually, built more and more nuclear power plants, in the United States since that date. And nuclear power plants, in fact, one of the last nuclear power plants built in the United States was Diablo Canyon in California. My stepfather was one of the attorneys on that case and spent some time there in Diablo Canyon's nuclear power plant. And his job was to fight them to make the power plant earthquake-proof, because they found after they built it, it was sitting on top of an earthquake fault line. And that's amazing, because my stepfather died of pancreas cancer at 59 years old. So here's what starts to happen. Now, cancer rates go up all over the United States as a consequence of these laws that allowed the government to do this. You know, it's just astounding. It's astounding how many people die of cancer in the United States every year. You know, here's the total for 2002 was 500,000, 557,000, according to figures published by the National Center for Health Statistics. That's pretty consistent with a high level, what John Goffman would call a much higher level of background radiation, leaking from nuclear power plants, getting in water supplies, nuclear waste, chemical pollution. Now, that's not to say that everyone who died of cancer, the radiation is responsible. But if you look at the number of deaths pre-nuclear era, they're at least 5 times less than that, according to National Institute of Health Studies. So more like in the 50,000 range. So that's our new background level. We're saying that that's normal. So when Fukushima happens, we say, oh, don't worry. We already have 500,000 deaths from cancer every year in this country. So this isn't really going to change things much, even though it is. So we say that's okay. Obama says, oh, you don't even have to prepare. You don't have to do anything to prepare. And meanwhile, children are dying at increased levels in Washington, consistent with the arrival of the radioactive iodine clouds and the cesium and, God forbid, the plutonium particles. And I just can't believe that what a job the media did in reporting this. Like, as if it's nothing that a child has died, or that 12 or 15 children are dying a month as a consequence of this in those states where the radiation levels were higher. I just can't imagine being the father.
Well, is it true that the government raised the safe limits, you know, of acceptable exposure to kind of cover up what was going on?
They kept raising it, and they've raised it higher than 100 times Goffman's limit in 1969. And, you know, I knew Goffman. I spent hours with him on the phone. I know his frustration. I know what he's trying to say. His goal was to get women to not take mammograms unless there was some indication that they really did have cancer. That there's no way they should be getting mammograms. Or he was a proponent of digital X-rays, both dental and medical X-rays, digital, because digital is lower dose. In fact, when you go to the dentist, they tell you, well, this is the same as flying on an airplane trip. Sorry, it is not the same thing. You're sending nuclear radiation, X-ray, one of the most penetrating forms of radiation. In nuclear radiation, you basically have alpha, beta, X-ray, gamma, and neutron radiation. Those are your main forms of radiation. Different particles, radioactive particles, called radionuclides, are floating in the air or in the water, or they're in your vegetable. So that's the difference between flying on an airplane. When someone is pointing an X-ray at your brain, which is where your teeth are, I'm sorry, Mr. Dentist, you're wrong. You just need to read John Goffman's studies. You do not point X-rays at the brain. It's just not a good thing to do. So you shouldn't get dental X-rays unnecessarily. You should have a toothache. You shouldn't just get an examination for the heck of it. A lot of dentists have digital X-rays today, but not all of them, nowhere near all of them have them, which are much lower dose than the older ones. So that's a caution for everybody right there. Now, in my business, yeah.
But what about, like, the contamination of the ocean water? You know, you opened the show talking about the oil spill, but I would think since Japan's an island and they're, you know, on the ocean, what about the contamination of the water? I mean, that's like two big hits in 1 year.
Well, that's just it, exactly. I mean, they had to forcibly dump many thousands of tons of radioactive liquid from having used seawater to try to cool these nuclear power plants down, which, you know, didn't work. They had nowhere to store all that radioactive water, and they had to let it go. And then when they let it go, it made matters much worse. In fact, there were, in the New York Times, you know, cargo ships, hundreds of miles off of the Japanese coastline. When they arrived in California, the hulls were radioactive. And a lot of the cargo was radioactive, and a lot of electronics from Japan became radioactive, and there are many cargoes and customs that have rejected worldwide, including in France. Like, don't buy green tea anymore from Japan. It's all radioactive. I mean, that country is finished as far as their green tea export market. I mean, I'm a big green tea drinker, and we bought up a large inventory of last year's crop. But that's it. I mean, in fact, in where they shipped a whole bunch of green tea, they caught on to it and they took readings, and it was lethal levels of radiation in the green tea. So be careful, because they're still exporting a lot of products illegally, which the levels of which are very, very unsafe for the human body. So now with the ocean, you get reports of radioactive contamination in the fish all the way to Alaska. In fact, the Alaskan government refuses to test the fish up there for radiation, and that's why you got to get one of these meters. You cannot buy the meters in the United States anymore. If anybody wants a meter, just write davidsereda@hotmail.com, and I'll show you how to get a very good Russian meter that's very accurate. That's the only place you can get them now. They sold out worldwide. So now that's one of the things that's happened now. Finally, the Georgia Strait in Vancouver, British Columbia, there's articles about how the government lied to us, and the radiation levels here are really high. There's a guy going around with one of these Russian meters that I have that goes and measures the rain as far away as Alberta, Canada, British Columbia. And it says on the meter, dangerous radiation background, and it shows you the levels in microsievert, per hour. And you're reading it going, oh, my God, this is the equivalent of several times the Goffman limit for background radiation in Alberta, Canada, where I was born, and in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I lived for dozens of years. So it's happening. It's happening right now. There was a guy who took the same meter to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and the levels were 250 counts a minute. 250 counts a minute. Now, the Goffman limit is somewhere around what I converted it, what you would call 50 counts a minute. That's his safety level. Even with that level attained, he said you'll have increased cancer of 30,000 deaths a year in the United States. Well, we're way past that in many areas. Now, not where I live. Where I live in Arizona, we're at like 18 counts a minute, which is normal. You get a normal amount of counts per minute on your meter due to cosmic rays coming from space. So, and ambient energies in the environment. And if you happen to live like somewhere near the Grand Canyon where you're sitting on top of a uranium mine, you're going to see some huge levels there. So it's spreading. It's far from over. People are testing these particles daily, some people in their water supply in the air. The vegetables in the San Francisco Bay Area were tested at the University of California, Berkeley, and they found plutonium, uranium, cesium in the vegetables. And they're saying, don't worry, well, the levels of plutonium are so low, you don't have to worry. Well, 1/millionth of a gram of plutonium-238 is going to kill you. So what can we do? Of course the government lies because they're there to protect big business. We don't have a government that cares about us. John Goffman, in 1969, the government didn't care about you or I. They said you're going to be a casualty of us needing nuclear power. And if you want to build nuclear fusion power, like Bogdan-Kasselmag, which was doing with helium-3, sorry, we're going to stop you from ever attaining your goal. In fact, at our company, the Advanced Physics Corporation, Glenn Seaborg became the chairman of our company, and we thought Darth Vader, the man who authorized all nuclear testing in Nevada, the very man that this is very deep information I'm going to give you. I met with a man named John Meyer living in exile in Canada who worked for Howard Hughes, was hired by Howard Hughes to stop all nuclear testing. Howard Hughes wanted to bribe Lyndon Johnson and every presidential candidate $1 million to end the testing. He was very serious, and Seaborg was furious because he was the head of the Atomic Energy Commission. And what Goffman told me it seemed like too big of a conspiracy theory. It seemed like, how could he be telling me the truth about why he's living in exile in Canada and the CIA wanted him dead? He worked for Howard Hughes. Well, Goffman told me there was nothing wrong with Howard Hughes. That was an actor they had in there. Nobody had seen Howard Hughes for over a year in person because he was living in absolute fear of the government pursuing him because of his efforts to stop the bomb. And that he was not mentally insane. John Meyer was in regular contact with Howard Hughes. And Meyer told me they made a deal with him or they killed him. He didn't know, but he said they took the real Howard Hughes out in a helicopter and flew him away, and the actor was in there and died, and no one ever really saw him. So I said, what's the motive? What's the motive to kill him? So one day I'm driving the legendary Glenn Seaborg, the father of atomic, weapons in the United States, very old man. And I'm driving him to the airport, and he didn't know I knew about Meyer. And I said to him, what's the story with Howard Hughes? Why did this happen? I gave him a little bit of information about what I knew. And he started shaking. His whole arms and his neck was shaking, and he said, damn him. He was so mad. He said he almost stopped our nuclear weapons testing. And I said, that's the motive. That's the motive to kill the real Howard Hughes. And to make him so paranoid he would never leave his room because he was afraid he was going to be killed. And they did kill him, according to John Meyer. So Seaborg had authorized the injection of pregnant women with radioactive isotopes at Vanderbilt University in New York. Authorized the injection of pregnant women with radioactive isotopes, not telling the mothers, and the children were all born with birth defects. This is the same university that the New York Times reported last year that children were given chest x-rays, infants, full chest x-rays with no lead protection. And regardless, an infant should never get an x-ray, even with the lead protection. Now, why did they do it? Because they made it look like they're negligent, but actually they're doing studies. They want to see how mutated a baby can get by exposing them to x-rays. This is in the New York Times just last year. I got all these little bits and pieces of the puzzle. So when it comes to...
I guess I don't understand something, though. It's like, why are they so invested in nuclear energy versus what you were talking about, the fusion reactor, or something that is safer, cleaner, easier to do? I don't understand why the investment in it.
That was I pondered that question for years because, by the time the year 2000 came along, I had given up. Seaborg was dead. Many of our other physicists were dead. Dr. Magwitch is still alive. The whole effort to fund helium-3 fusion was over, and all the forces were against us, and everyone at NASA who had any power wouldn't fight for us anymore. And we figured it out. It was to protect the nuclear weapons industry because nuclear power plants breed explosive plutonium for bombs and tritium for hydrogen bombs, which is part of the thermal blanket you put in a H-bomb. And the half-life of tritium is 12 and a half years, so you need to replace it a lot, so you need a lot of tritium. And non-radioactive nuclear power plants can't breed plutonium, and they can't breed tritium. So they need, the nuclear weapons industry piggybacks the utilities who cooperatively build nuclear power plants with them so they have a constant inventory of nuclear fuel for bombs. And if helium-3 was, funded, the utilities wouldn't spend all that money, billions of dollars on radioactive nuclear power plants when a small meter-squared power plant would produce the same amount of power with no radiation. It would all be over. And the Department of Defense would have nowhere to get their weapons fuel. That's the only thing that I could figure out. But among Goffman's studies, things start to get really interesting here because now we can move in more of a positive direction. Why were there certain survivors in Japan when we dropped nuclear bombs on them and they were exposed to the same amount of radiation as people who died? And why were there people who didn't get cancer at all? and there were people who were suffering from cancer from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So what starts to happen now is the same thing as in our country. Why does the government keep raising the supposed safety limit on radiation? And that's because one kid will get leukemia who lives near high-tension power lines and another doesn't. So they think, oh, well, you can't prove. A study done by the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, says you can't prove that these cancers are caused by radiation from the power lines. One person's on their cell phone all day and the other one gets cancer and the other doesn't. You can't prove that that's being caused by cell phones because it's not uniform. And this is the excuse. They knew the answer, and I know the answer too, why one person got it and one person didn't, is really their excuse to raise the safety limits. So today, safety limits are based on that kind of data. Everything from this person is exposed to nuclear radiation and radioactive isotopes in the water living downstream from a nuclear power plant, and this person is exposed to the same amount of radiation, and their cancer rates are not uniform. But there are high cancer rates in people who live even near nuclear waste dump sites, all over the United States. And so the data is not uniform, so they just say, okay, let's raise the safety limit. Because we want to see if it goes up if everybody gets cancer. And not everybody does, and that is interesting. That is super interesting. So what I've been doing in my company is first, I built this year, in the past several months, I've completed a formula that blocks over 99% or 95% of cell phone and computer radiation. Because even people using their laptops on their lap, and God forbid mothers or pregnant women are doing this, there's so much radiation coming off your computer going into your reproductive organs. It's really a wonder that people don't know this. I designed a formula for a material that we've tested with several different meters, electromagnetic radiation meters as well as microwave meters, and I can block it. Normal radiation, this type of cell phone radiation and computer radiation goes through, an inch thick of steel or aluminum, like it's even there. Gold doesn't block it. A NASA scientist told me gold would block it. No, it doesn't block it. Hair dryers radiate so much, I would never point one of those things at my head. When you see it's over 30 milligauss pointing at your head. A Harvard medical doctor told me privately that over anything above 1.8 milligauss, that's a thousandth of a gauss, which is this. Gauss is the unit of measure of the strength of a magnetic field. Over 1.8 is harmful. Well, cell phones are past 5, past 6, next year, way past. Hair dryers are 30 and 40. Your laptop computer is past 5 and 6. And I found companies for a year that were sending me these Faraday cage, materials that were thousands of dollars for a little piece that the military uses, and they didn't even block today's cell phone radiation because the frequency of today's transmissions, or the G3 and the G4 networks, is so high in frequency it goes right through the Faraday cage mesh. That stuff doesn't work at all. And then there were companies that sent me magnetic shielding that was so expensive per sheet I couldn't make a product. I designed it's a laptop tray with an aluminum skin that you can put your laptop computer on. It blocks all the radiation. And I can prove it with meters, whereas all these little gadgets people are selling you, put it on your phone. I've tested all of those. Then none of them block the radiation. They're just little gizmos that people are really taking advantage of people with. They do not work.
Do they block some kinds of radiation,
no.
like certain frequencies? Nothing.
They don't block anything. If you get a good tri-field meter, because cell phones broadcast in the microwave spectrum, they don't block anything at all. You can't see any difference on an EMF meter or a microwave detector. So microwave ovens are disastrous. They put the mesh of what's known as a Faraday cage mesh. If you look in the window of your microwave, you'll see the little holes in the mesh, so you can see your potato in there. You hold one of these meters in front of it, and oh my God, I mean, I got a stomachache looking at the meters. They were going crazy, way beyond your hairdryer. So,
well, you can actually feel that. You turn the microwave on. I mean, I don't know about other people. I can feel it. You know, just standing next to it, it's like you can. It's like, hey, I'm cooking inside.
What I had to do, because everything out there was so expensive, I went through everything on the periodic table, and I found a combination and layering that blocks all of it. I can block a microwave. I can block anything. So, you know, we're going to come out with little cell phone jackets and trays that you can put your cell phone on your lap and use it in speaker mode and use your laptop computer safely. So now that's been one of my goals, is to block the radiation, and that's one method. But one of the most incredible series of research is, why did certain people in Japan after the atomic bombs in 1945 get cancer at all? Well, they found that, most Japanese eat white rice. Those that were eating the brown rice, which were actually poor families, the brown rice is full of magnesium and potassium. And those two guys are super electrolytes. Good electrolytes raise the voltage in your cells. Your cells have current. They have amperage and not even micro, amperage and millivolts, which is a thousandth of a volt. If you get an ordinary voltmeter and put it on the 200 amp volt setting, you can measure the voltage on your fingertips. And you can see the numbers jumping up and down because of all the different pulses going on in your body. Your body is electrical because your cells are electrical. And so what you find is, under the microscope, if you look at cells that are high voltage cells, that are cells that are healthy, that have access to the proper family of electrolytes, and I'm not talking about Gatorade here, because that stuff doesn't work at all. I got my voltmeter out, and I started creating a formula, a super drink of all of the most rare sodiums, salts, potassiums, and different types of micro minerals that the body needs. And I could see the voltmeter going up and down depending on what I was adding. And I came up with a drink. It's totally natural. And you drink it, and you can measure your volts on your fingertips. They go way up. And they stay up. They stay at a high level. You can feel the energy in your body. Your skin is tingling with electricity when you drink this stuff. And it's all natural ingredients, and it's going to be a formula that I'm going to have for sale. But then we also developed a technology 2 years ago where we were able to program crystal pendants with information.
Hey, David. It's break time again.
Break time.
But let's come back to talking about crystals and this is very interesting, after the break.
Okay.
All right. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to David Sereda about radiation and nuclear energy, and now we're moving on to what you can do to protect yourself. So we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.